I am Maria Lowe. At 26, with the rank of a combat medic, I signed the papers to adopt a baby girl who had been discarded like yesterday's trash. I was single. I lived in a cramped apartment outside the base, had zero emergency savings, and didn't have a soul willing to help me change a diaper at 3 a.m. And I had just forced myself to swallow a diagnosis of infertility from the hospital. Instead of offering a shred of comfort, my mother looked at me and said, "You can't even take care of yourself." My father threw in his own punch. "That kid is going to ruin your life." And then, on the very afternoon I brought my daughter home and laid her in that rickety, self-assembled crib, there was a letter waiting in the mailbox. Thick, cream-colored paper. It was from my mother. It wasn't a "congratulations." It was a formal order of excommunication. But there was one thing that woman never saw coming. 14 years later, that same mistake of a child would stand on a graduation stage in front of 300 people and read that letter at the top of her lungs. Welcome back to noble revenge, where the brutal truth is stripped bare and justice is served cold. If this story hits home, leave a comment and subscribe because the truth behind it still makes my skin crawl. Now, let's go back to the start, before the letter. Before any of it. The fluorescent lights in the clinic hummed with a low, vibrating buzz that made my teeth ache. The air smelled of industrial-grade bleach and the sharp, stinging scent of rubbing alcohol. Dr. Miller didn't look up from the x-rays. He just frowned, his eyes scanning the gray, shadowy shapes of my insides like he was looking at a faulty engine schematic. "Stage 3 endometriosis," he said. The words were flat, dry. He delivered the news with the same professional detachment I used when filing a combat equipment damage report. My future was being erased in a windowless room, and all I could hear was the scratching of his pen against a clipboard. I sat there on that cheap plastic chair, my spine a rigid line of steel. No tears, not one. Tears don't stop a bleed on the battlefield, and they weren't going to fix my broken machinery now. I didn't ask about options or miracle cures. I just stared at the white tile floor and asked one thing. Can I still lift heavy crates at the training grounds on Monday? He looked surprised for a split second, then nodded. I took the original file, folded it once, and tucked it into my breast pocket. It sat right over my heart, a jagged little secret that felt heavier than my standard issue plate carrier. 3 hours later, I was in the Sunday trench. That's what I called my mother's dining room. It was the theater of the Lowe family, where every meal was a performance of middle-class perfection. The air was heavy with the smell of roasted ham and the overly sweet scent of the vanilla candles Donna lit to hide the smell of her own bitterness. Stacy sat in the center of the table, her 6-month-old pregnancy belly acting as the evening's guest of honor. Donna was in high gear, hovering over Stacy like she was a fragile porcelain doll. "Eat more, honey. You're eating for 2 now," Donna chirped, her voice hitting that high, fake register she used for the church choir. She spent 10 minutes bragging about the $1,000 stroller she'd just imported. Leather handles, gold-plated trim, a trophy for a child who hadn't even arrived yet. I sat at the far end of the table, the folding chair of the family. My portion of mashed potatoes was already cold, the gravy forming a thin, translucent skin. I watched the silver forks clink against the fine china, a sharp rhythmic sound that felt like it was scraping directly against my nerves. I waited for a lull in the chatter about nursery themes and diaper brands. I took a slow breath, my lungs feeling tight against the medical file in my pocket. "I have a medical update," I said. My voice was level, echoing the tone I used to read coordinates over a radio. I laid it out. Short, direct. I told them I wouldn't be having children of my own. I told them the doctors were done. The room went dead. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Nobody stood up. Nobody reached across the table to grab my hand. Nobody even looked me in the eye. Donna didn't skip a beat. She put her fork down with a slow, deliberate click. She took a silk napkin, patted the corners of her mouth, and looked at me with eyes as empty as a dry well. "Well," she whispered, her voice like a razor blade wrapped in velvet. "Maybe that's just God's way of saying you weren't meant to be a mother anyway, Maria." Beside her, my father, Richard, didn't even blink. He just reached for the breadbasket, his eyes fixed on a piece of sourdough like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Stacy just looked down at her soup, her hand instinctively covering her belly as if my failure might be contagious. The suffocating knot in my throat, that jagged, bitter pressure, felt like it was going to choke me. I felt the heat rising in my neck, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of a breakdown. Not here. Not in this theater. I pushed my chair back. The legs screeched against the hardwood floor. I stood up, my back straight, my chin tucked. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I walked out the front door and didn't look back at the picture-perfect house with its manicured lawn and its rotting interior. The drive back to the base was 40 miles of black asphalt and biting wind that whistled through the cracks in my old truck's window. The rust-belt sky was a bruise-colored purple, heavy with the threat of rain. My hands gripped the cold, cracked leather of the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned a ghostly, bloodless white. The silence in the cab was deafening. Every mile was another layer of ice forming around my heart. My own blood had just taught me the most valuable survival lesson of my career. When you're bleeding out, you don't call for people who want to watch you die. You pack the wound yourself. You cauterize it. You keep moving. I pulled through the base gates, the heavy steel barricades a welcome sight. As I parked my truck in the gravel lot, I looked at the medical file on the passenger seat. My body had slammed one door shut, but as I sat there in the dark, watching the guard tower lights sweep across the fence, a new, colder resolve took hold. If my own biology wouldn't give me a family, I'd find another way. I'd use the law. I'd use my own two hands to build a fortress that Donna Lowe could never touch. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a stack of blank forms I'd taken from the family advocacy office weeks ago. My fingers traced the bold letters at the top of the page. Application for adoption. The mission had changed, but the objective was clear. I was done being a victim of the Lowe family legacy. I was going to be a mother, and I didn't need their permission or their prayers to do it. The silence in my truck after that dinner wasn't empty. It was heavy. It was the kind of silence that sits in your gut like lead after a long watch. My family had drawn a line in the sand, and I was on the wrong side of it. But in the military, when one path is blocked, you find another. You don't retreat, you reposition. Monday morning at the base felt like coming home. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and stale coffee. I sat at my desk in the family advocacy wing, a gray cubicle surrounded by the hum of cooling fans and the rhythmic tapping of keyboards. My task was simple: sort through the wreckage of broken homes. Dozens of folders were piled high, a mountain of red tape and human misery. Then, it happened. A light blue folder slid out from the middle of the stack. It hit the metal desk with a soft thud. I opened it. No name. Just a hospital ID number and a grainy Polaroid. A baby girl. Abandoned at the local hospital 2 days ago. Wrapped in a thin, hospital-grade blanket, her tiny face was scrunched up, defiant even in sleep. Something in my chest made a sound. A sharp, metallic click. It was the exact sound of a round being chambered into a rifle. Sudden, final, locked in. I didn't think. I didn't weigh the pros and cons. I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh application for adoption. I didn't care that I was a single woman with a combat medic's salary. I didn't care that I was broken, according to my mother's God. I was going to be the one who chose this girl. The next 4 months were a war of attrition. The bureaucracy was a beast. I lived on black coffee and adrenaline. My life became an endless cycle of background checks, credit scores, and home inspections. The state wanted to see every cent I'd ever earned and every mistake I'd ever made. I handed over my tax returns like a confession. To make the numbers work, I took every night shift the base hospital offered. 12-hour grinds, stale sandwiches from the vending machine at 3 a.m. My eyes were bloodshot, my uniform felt a size too big, and my skin took on the gray tint of the fluorescent lights. I stood straight anyway. I polished my boots until I could see my tired eyes in the reflection. Discipline was the only thing keeping the exhaustion at bay. On the final day of the vetting process, I stood in Major Margaret Hayes' office. The room smelled like menthol cigarettes and old paper. She was a creature of habit, a woman who had seen more war than most men on this base. She flipped through my 50-page file, her face a mask of stone. She picked up the heavy red stamp. Thud. Approved blazed across the front of my life in bold, ink-red letters. The sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls like a pistol shot. Margaret looked up. A rare, razor-thin smile touched her lips. "I've been waiting for you to turn in those papers for a long time, Specialist Lowe. You're a damn good medic. You'll be a better mother." She didn't offer a hug. She didn't need to. That stamp was the only validation I required. The following Sunday, I went back to the Lowe house. Not for a meal, for a report. The dining room was exactly the same vanilla candles, the same clink of silver on china. Stacy was showing off a sonogram photo, her husband Richard nodding like a mindless bobblehead. Donna was beaming, her pearls catching the light. I didn't sit down. I stood at the edge of the table, my hands clasped behind my back. I waited for the chatter to die down. "I've been approved," I said. My voice was low, cutting through Donna's laughter like a knife through soft fat. "I'm adopting a baby girl. She'll be home in 2 weeks." The silver stopped clinking. Donna's face didn't crumble. It hardened. It turned into a gargoyle mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. She didn't even whisper this time. She hissed. "You're bringing a stranger into this family, a child from God knows where, some filthy place?" Donna's voice rose, vibrating with a desperate kind of anger. "How am I supposed to look the women at the church in the eye, Maria? Tell them my daughter is raising someone else's mistake instead of keeping our family's dignity. You're a disgrace." Richard grumbled into his bread, not even looking up. "The kid is gonna ruin your life, Maria. You can't handle it." I looked at them, really looked at them. For 26 years, I had tried to fit into their narrow, suffocating boxes. I had looked for love in a place that only traded in judgment. I reached down and grabbed a white cloth napkin from an empty setting. I wiped a stray bit of gravy from the corner of my mouth, folded it into a tight, ugly ball, and tossed it right into the middle of Donna's plate, on top of her half-eaten ham. "The baby isn't the problem, Mom," I said. My voice was stone cold. "You are. If you have ever felt the power of walking away from people who only see your flaws, hit that like button right now. Have you ever had a moment where you finally realized that family is a choice, not just blood? Drop a comment with the word chosen if you stand with Maria. Make sure you subscribe to Noble Revenge. We are just getting started, and the truth is going to get a lot louder from here." I turned on my heel. I didn't wait for her to scream. I didn't wait for Richard to give me another lecture on my life. The walk to the truck was the lightest I'd felt in years. The gravel crunched under my boots, a satisfying, gritty sound. I got in, slammed the rusted door shut, and started the engine. The drive back to my apartment took exactly 37 minutes. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. There was no need for tears when the mission was finally underway. I looked in the rearview mirror as the lights of the Lowe house faded into the dark, rust-belt horizon. I reached over and touched the blue folder on the passenger seat. The approved stamp felt warm under my fingertips. The door to my past hadn't just closed. I had welded it shut. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a black car parked across the street. The lights flickered once, then went dark. I gripped the steering wheel, my pulse steady. I knew that car. It was Stacy's. Stacy lived a life wrapped in velvet. It was a soft, suffocating existence bought and paid for with a $40,000 down payment from Donna. At 25, while I was patching up shrapnel wounds in a humid tent, Stacy was picking out eggshell white paint for her colonial-style house in the suburbs. She didn't earn that house. She traded her spine for it. Every time Donna threw one of those 40 guest parties for Stacy's kids with the professional photographers and the catered ham. The price tag was clear. Donna didn't give gifts. She issued loans of obedience. She moved in for 2 weeks after every birth, scrubbing Stacy's floors and oversalting her soup, and Stacy just smiled and nodded. She had to. You don't bite the hand that signs the checks for your mortgage. I didn't envy her, not for a second. I looked at Stacy and saw a commercial transaction, not a sister. I categorized her under assets owned by Donna Lowe. I was a combat medic with grease under my fingernails and a bank account that barely cleared the rent. But my soul was mine. Hers was locked in Donna's china cabinet. 2 weeks after I'd announced the adoption, the Cold War went hot. It was Friday night, 11 p.m. I was sitting on my kitchen floor, the linoleum cold against my thighs, surrounded by cardboard boxes. My phone buzzed on the laminate counter. The vibration sounded like a hornet in a tin can. Stacy. I picked up. I didn't say a word. I just listened to the dead air on the other end. Maria. Her voice was a thin, shaky whisper. She sounded like she was crouching in a dark closet, terrified of being caught. It was the voice of a deserter hiding in a hole while the rest of the unit took the fire. I'm calling because I'm worried. Mom is in a state, Maria. A real state. I leaned my head back against the fridge. The hum of the compressor vibrated through my skull. Get to the point, Stacy. The baby, she hissed, her voice cracking. You have to stop this. Mom is talking about cutting off the diaper money for the kids. She's saying if you go through with this, she's going to stop the help with my house payments. She's livid. She says you're bringing filth into the family name. I felt a ghost of a smirk pull at the corner of my mouth. It wasn't funny, but the predictability was exhausting. And what did you say to her, Stacy? Did you tell her it's my life? Did you tell her that a baby isn't filth? Silence. Then a soft, pathetic sniffle. I have a feverish kid here, Maria. I'm stressed. I can't lose that money. If Mom cuts me off, we lose the house. Why do you have to be so stubborn? Just tell her you changed your mind. Do it for the sake of the family. Please. I looked at my hands. They were rough, the skin around the knuckles cracked from industrial soap and heavy lifting. These were hands that worked. Stacy's hands only reached out for handouts. Stacy, I said, my voice dropping into that low, dangerous register I used when a private was losing their head under pressure. Stop playing the victim. You aren't caught in the middle. You're standing right behind her, holding her coat while she stabs me. That's not fair. I'm just trying to keep the peace. No, I cut her off. The words felt like lead. You aren't neutral. You just picked a side. You just traded your sister for a $40,000 velvet cage. Don't call me again until you find your spine. Good luck with the mortgage. I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I just set it on the counter and watched the screen go black. The silence that followed was absolute. The Lowe family was a sinking ship, and Stacy had just jumped into the only lifeboat Donna provided. I stood up, my knees popping in the quiet apartment. I walked into the small bedroom at the end of the hall. It was empty save for the fresh coat of white paint I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. applying. It smelled like chemicals and potential. The crib was a flat-packed mess on the floor. I grabbed a metal wrench from my toolkit. Clink. The sound was sharp and honest. I knelt on the floor and started to work. I didn't need a team. I didn't need a mother's blessing or a sister's support. I dragged the heavy wooden rails into place, my muscles straining against the weight. I threaded the bolts by hand, feeling the grit of the metal against my skin. I worked in the dark, the only light coming from a single street lamp outside the window. With every turn of the wrench, I felt the fortress getting stronger. I wasn't just building a bed, I was building a barricade. I tightened the last screw until my knuckles went white and the wood groaned under the pressure. Locked. I stood back and looked at it. A solid, sturdy crib in the middle of a quiet room. I was alone on this battlefield, but I was standing on high ground. I had a medic's hands and a soldier's heart, and that was more than Donna Lowe's money could ever buy. I went back to the kitchen, drank a glass of lukewarm tap water, and sat by the window. I watched the gray dawn begin to bleed over the Rust Belt horizon, turning the sky the color of a dirty nickel. I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from doing the work yourself. At exactly 7:15 a.m., 3 sharp, rhythmic knocks hit my front door. I didn't move for a second. I scanned the room, checked my perimeter. I walked to the door, my boots silent on the floor. I looked through the peephole. A postal worker in a blue uniform stood there, holding a thick stack of envelopes and a heavy cardboard box. I opened the door. "Specialist Lowe?" the man asked, squinting against the morning light. "That's me." "Sign here." He handed me a digital pad. I scribbled my name, a sharp, jagged line that looked like a heart monitor spike. He handed over the mail and the box. The box was heavy, sealed with reinforced tape. No return address, just a local postmark. I took it inside and set it on the counter next to my cold coffee. On top of the stack of mail was a thick, cream-colored envelope. The paper felt heavy, expensive, and completely out of place in my cramped kitchen. I didn't need to open it to know what it was. I picked up a steak knife and sliced through the tape on the box first. Inside, tucked under layers of bubble wrap, was something that made my breath hitch. And right next to it, the cream-colored envelope seemed to pulse with a silent, toxic energy. The first shot of the real war had just been fired. The rain in March did not fall, it hovered. A cold, gray mist that turned the Rust Belt sky into the color of a wet sidewalk. I stood on the porch of my apartment, my navy issue jacket zipped to the chin, watching a beat-up sedan pull into the gravel lot. A social worker stepped out, shielding a bundle against the damp wind. This was it. I took the weight into my arms. 3.2 kilograms. Lily was light, but she felt like an anchor, grounding me to a world I had almost given up on. Her hand was the size of a lemon, tiny fingers curling with prehistoric strength around my calloused thumb. In that moment, something in my chest, something that had been cold and jagged since the doctor's office, finally snapped into place. We went inside. I sat at the kitchen table, the baby sleeping in the crook of my arm. The paperwork was thick, dry. It smelled like stale toner and bureaucracy. I turned to page 11, then 14, then 22. I did not hesitate. I gripped the pen and signed my name in sharp, aggressive capital letters. Each stroke of the ink felt like a claim, a declaration of war against the void. From the second that ink dried, the world had a Lily Lowe. And she had me. That afternoon, after I laid her in the crib I'd built with my own 2 hands, I went to the mailbox. It was a routine move. Habit. I expected bills, junk mail, maybe a coupon for the grocery store down the street. Instead, tucked between a utility notice and a credit card offer, I saw it. Thick, cream-colored paper. Heavy. The kind of stationery Donna used for her church invitations and her proper thank you notes. In the top left corner, the embossed initials stared back at me. DC, Donna Lowe. I walked back inside, my boots thudding heavy on the floorboards. I sat on the edge of my bed. My hands did not shake. I slid a thumb under the flap and ripped it open. The smell of Donna's expensive floral perfume wafted out, clashing with the scent of baby formula and wet wool. The letter was not a note. It was an indictment. "Maria," the ink began, every loop of her cursive looking like a noose. "I cannot support this decision. You are throwing away your life for someone else's mistake. That child comes from some dirty corner of the world. You have no idea what kind of trouble she will bring into our home. Do not come back here. Do not call this house. Until you come to your senses and realize what you have done, you are on your own." Signed, Mother. The silence in the room became a physical thing. It pressed against my eardrums. I did not rip the paper. I did not scream into the empty hallway. I looked at the word mother and felt a cold, hard clarity wash over me. She had just fired the first shot. She had labeled an innocent baby filth before even seeing her face. I stood up. I walked to the closet and reached for the top shelf. I pulled down a tattered cardboard box. Inside were my old combat boots, caked in dried mud from my basic training days. They were symbols of a version of me that knew how to endure. I smoothed out the cream-colored paper, folded it neatly, and tucked it into the left boot. A soldier does not throw away enemy ammunition that misses the mark. She saves it, she studies it, she waits for the right moment to fire it back. I closed the box and went to the kitchen to heat a bottle. The real campaign had begun. The first year was not a dream. It was a siege, 8 weeks. That was all the maternity leave I had before I was back on the base. 8 weeks of healing from the inside out while learning how to be a son for a tiny planet. There were no reinforcements, no calls from Stacy to ask if I needed a nap, no check-in from Richard. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. The childcare crisis in this country is a joke, but for a single specialist on a medic's salary, it was a death sentence. $16 a day for a spot in a crowded daycare. Every morning, I dropped Lily off at 5 a.m. The sky still pitch black, my heart feeling like it was being dragged behind the truck. Every cent of my food allowance went to her winter clothes, her diapers, her medicine. I learned how to live on black coffee and the leftover crackers from the base cafeteria. Then came the nights, the colic. At 2 a.m., Lily's screams would shatter the quiet of the apartment complex. It was a raw, visceral sound that made my skin prickle. I would scoop her up, wrap her in a thin blanket, and pace the narrow hallway. Step, turn, step, turn. I walked that floor like I was pulling guard duty in a high-threat zone. My eyes were bloodshot. My bones felt like they were made of lead. I could hear the neighbors through the thin walls, muffled curses, the thud of a fist against the drywall. They did not see a mother trying to save her child. They saw a nuisance. I did not apologize. I kept walking. I whispered coordinates to her, telling her stories of the world we were going to build together. By December, the cold in the Rust Belt was a living thing. It seeped through the window frames. On Christmas Eve, the world outside was quiet. A few miles away, I knew Donna's house was glowing. I could picture the table. 14 people. The smell of a honey-glazed ham. The sparkling cider. The laughter of people who had decided I did not exist. I sat on my living room floor. I had bought a 60-centimeter plastic tree from the pharmacy. It was crooked and smelled like cheap oil. I hung exactly one ornament on it, a small silver bell that Major Margaret Hayes had left on my desk a week before. I looked at Lily, sleeping soundly in her crib. She was wearing a thick fleece sleeper I had bought by skipping lunch for 3 days. She was warm. She was safe. She was mine. I did not have blood family. I had a silver bell and a soldier's discipline. I reached into the closet and felt the weight of the boot box. The letter was still there, waiting. I looked at the crooked little tree and realized I was not lonely. I was fortified. Donna Lowe thought she had buried me. She did not realize I was a seed. I turned off the light and sat in the dark, watching the snow fall against the glass. The first year was almost over. I was still standing. The silence was no longer heavy. It was a weapon. By the time Lily turned 2, the front lines had stabilized. The desperate, bone-deep exhaustion of the first year had hardened into a manageable rhythm of discipline. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. My promotion to senior medical caseworker came with a pay bump and a new set of stripes. But more importantly, it gave me the leverage I needed to finish the mission. I didn't waste my money on a lease in a nice suburb or a car I couldn't afford. I went looking for a carcass. I found it at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in a town that the recession had tried to swallow whole. It was a foreclosed property, a $62,000 wreck with a sagging porch and a yard full of rusted machinery. To most people, it was an eyesore. To me, it was a tactical advantage. Using my VA loan, I claimed that ground. My weekends were no longer spent resting. I spent them in grease-stained t-shirts and worn-out work boots. While my co-workers were at backyard barbecues, I was swinging a hammer, driving long, honest nails into a new cedar fence. The sound of steel hitting wood, whack, 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 was the only therapy I needed. I stripped the nicotine-stained wallpaper and replaced it with clean, eggshell white paint. The smell of cheap primer and sawdust became the scent of my freedom. When Lily was 14 months old, it happened. I was on my hands and knees in the kitchen, scrubbing decades of grime off the linoleum. Lily was standing near the new refrigerator, holding onto the handle for balance. She looked at me, her eyes bright and steady, and let out a sound that stopped my heart. Mama. The brush fell from my hand. I didn't cry. Soldiers don't leak under pressure. The pressure in my chest was immense. I scooped her up, her small body smelling of lavender soap and milk, and held her against my sweat-soaked shirt. I chose you, I whispered into her hair, my voice thick with a promise that went deeper than blood. And I will always choose you. 3 years passed. The fortress was finished. Lily was 5 now, a brilliant, sharp-eyed girl who was already reading 4th-grade books, while her peers were still struggling with the alphabet. We were a unit of 2, self-sufficient, untouchable. Or so I thought. On a quiet Wednesday night, the invasion began. I was sitting at the kitchen island, a cup of black coffee in front of me, watching Lily draw a map of the solar system. The silence was broken by the sharp, intrusive trill of my phone. I glanced at the screen. A name I hadn't seen in 4 years stared back at me. Mother. My pulse didn't skip a beat. I'd spent too many years in high-stress zones for a phone call to rattle me. I tapped the speakerphone and set it on the granite counter. I didn't say hello, I just waited. Maria? Donna's voice came through the speaker, crisp and patronizing, as if she were talking to a wayward teenager rather than a senior officer. She didn't ask how I was. She didn't ask about my life. She just launched into her pitch like a car salesman. I've been hearing things, Donna said, her tone suggesting she was doing me a massive favor by acknowledging my existence. They say the girl is bright, that she's doing well in school. I suppose I'm curious to see her. After all, it's been long enough, don't you think? I watched Lily's crayon move across the paper. What do you want, Donna? I've decided I'm willing to meet her, she continued, ignoring my coldness. But we have to be smart about this. I found a park about 20 miles out of town. It's quiet. Nobody from the church or the social club goes there. We can meet this Saturday afternoon. The sensory detail of her voice, the fake, syrupy concern, made my stomach turn. I knew exactly what this was. Donna had heard Lily was a trophy, worth showing off, but she wasn't willing to pay the price of admission. Why 20 miles away? I asked, my voice as flat as a dial tone. Well, Maria, let's be realistic, she hissed, her voice dropping an octave. I can't have people seeing us together. Not yet. It would raise too many questions I'm not ready to answer. And there's a condition. The girl, Lily, she isn't to call me Grandma. It's too confusing. We'll just tell her I'm an old family friend. No labels. We'll keep it private. Just us. No labels. The words were a slap in the face. She wanted the curiosity of a grandchild without the embarrassment of the adoption. She wanted to satisfy her ego while keeping Lily in the shadows, hidden away like a dirty secret she could pull out of a drawer when it suited her. I picked up my coffee mug and set it down on the stone counter. Clack. The sound was final. No, I said. Donna paused. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, my voice dropping into the low command presence register I used on the training grounds. My daughter doesn't do private. She doesn't do shadows, and she definitely doesn't do family friends who are too ashamed to claim her in the light of day. Maria, don't be difficult. I'm trying to bridge the gap. You aren't bridging anything, Donna. You're trying to build a cage. I cut her off. My back was a straight line of steel against the kitchen chair. Either you belong to this family, and you stand with us under the sun, or you don't exist to us at all. There is no middle ground. There is no darkness for my daughter. Not anymore. You're being incredibly selfish, Donna spat, her mask finally slipping. You're depriving that child of her heritage? I'm protecting her from your poison, I replied. Don't call this number again. I tapped the red icon. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Lily, who was still focused on her drawing, completely unaware of the bullet I'd just caught for her. Donna Lowe would disappear for another 3 years after that call. She couldn't handle the light, so she retreated back into her world of Sunday dinners and church gossip. But I knew her type. A woman like Donna doesn't stay quiet when she feels humiliated. She was going to find a way to strike back. I leaned over and kissed the top of Lily's head. My fortress was secure, but as I looked out the window at the darkening street, I knew the ceasefire was over. The battle for my daughter's dignity had just moved to a new front. Tuesday afternoon at the local supermarket. The air was a mixture of floor wax and the artificial scent of industrial air freshener. Above, the cold neon lights flickered with a rhythmic, headache-inducing buzz. I pushed my shopping cart down the frozen food aisle, the wheels letting out a sharp, rhythmic squeak that grated against my nerves like a dull knife. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was looking for detergent and a steak. But in a town this small, you don't find groceries. You find ghosts. I turned the corner into the checkout lane and saw her. Barbara Nolan. She was the gatekeeper of Donna's church circle, a woman whose entire personality was built on a foundation of other people's business. She was leaning against her cart, clutching a bag of organic kale like it was a holy relic. When she saw me, her head tilted to the side. It was that specific, practiced look of pity, the kind used by people who want to feel superior under the guise of Christian concern. "Oh, Maria," she cooed, her voice hitting a high, nasal pitch that made the hair on my arms stand up. "We've been praying for you, truly. Your mother, she's just been in tears every Sunday at the ladies' auxiliary." I stopped the cart. My back was a solid, unmoving line. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Barbara stepped closer, her eyes scanning my faded uniform and my tired face. "She told us everything, honey. About how you're struggling, about the debt. She says you're drowning trying to handle, well, that child. She said you can't keep your head above water and that you're finally realizing what a mistake this was." It was a physical blow, delivered without a hand. For 6 years, I had clawed my way up. I had managed a medical caseworker department, kept my credit score spotless, and raised a girl who was smarter than half the adults in this town. But in the world Donna created at the church, I was a failure. I was the cautionary tale she used to buy herself more attention, more sympathy, more power. I felt my fingers tighten around the plastic handle of the cart until the knuckles turned a bloodless white. I looked Barbara Nolan directly in the eye, not with anger, but with the cold, steady gaze I used when triaging a trauma patient. "We are doing just fine, Mrs. Nolan," I said. My voice was a low, dangerous rumble, stripped of any politeness. "Tell my mother she can stop the theatrics. I don't need her prayers, and I certainly don't need her lies." I didn't wait for her to gasp. I didn't wait for her to defend poor Donna. I shoved the cart past her, the squeaking wheels drowning out whatever pearls of wisdom she was about to spit out. I paid for my groceries and walked out into the humid parking lot, my pulse steady. Dogs bark, but the convoy keeps moving. 7 years passed in a blur of school projects and base deployments. The summer Lily turned 13 was a hot one. The air in the house was thick, even with the AC humming in the window. I was on a double shift at the base hospital, leaving Lily to reorganize her closet, a task she'd approached with the same obsessive discipline I'd taught her. When I pulled into the driveway that evening, the house was too quiet. The lights were off. I walked into the bedroom. Lily was sitting on the edge of my bed. In the corner of the closet, the old cardboard box, the one that held my muddy basic training boots, had been moved. The lid was flipped open. Dust motes danced in a shaft of dying sunlight, hovering around the box like tiny ghosts. Lily didn't look up when I entered. In her lap lay a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was worn at the edges now, the paper yellowed, but the embossed initials, DC, were still visible. She had found it. The ammunition I'd been hiding for 14 years. Lily looked up at me. Her eyes weren't red from crying. They were dry. They were hard. They were exactly like mine. She held the letter between 2 fingers, tracing the sharp folds in the paper where her grandmother had written that she was a dirty mistake. The silence in the room was like a vacuum, pulling the air out of my lungs. "I read it," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I read what she called me. I read what she told you to do." I stepped toward her, but I didn't reach out. She didn't need a hug. She needed the truth. "If someone writes something this cruel," Lily asked, her voice dropping into a low, calculating whisper, "do you hide it? Do you keep it a secret because they're family?" I stood tall, my shoulders squared. I didn't offer an excuse. I didn't try to soften the blow. I looked my daughter in the eye with the same integrity I brought to every medical board on the base. "The truth is always more important than keeping secrets, Lily. I said. The words were a command. Always. I didn't know it then, but I had just handed her the keys to the armory. I hadn't just given her permission to know the truth. I had given her the orders to use it. If you've ever had to stare down a lie that was meant to bury you, hit that like button right now. Have you ever been the one person who kept the truth while everyone else was happy with a fake story? Drop a comment with the words, "Still standing," if you've survived the gossip and the backstabbing. Make sure you subscribe to Noble Revenge. The real battle is about to begin. And you don't want to miss how Lily handles that letter. Lily folded the cream-colored paper back into the envelope. She didn't put it back in the box. She tucked it under her pillow. "Okay, Mom," she said. She stood up and walked to the kitchen to start dinner. Her back was as straight as a soldier's in a parade. I watched her go, and for the first time in 14 years, I felt a shiver of fear. Not for myself, and certainly not for Lily. I felt fear for Donna Lowe. She thought she had written a letter to end a relationship. She didn't realize she had written the opening lines of her own public execution. The bullet was officially in the chamber. The end of 8th grade at Jefferson Middle School didn't arrive with a celebration. It arrived with a thick, suffocating humidity that turned the air into soup. The kind of heat that made the asphalt in the parking lot soft enough to swallow a boot heel. In my house, the atmosphere was different. It was still, pressurized, like the eerie drop in barometer readings right before a tornado touches down. Lily had pulled it off. She wasn't just graduating, she was the valedictorian. A straight-A student with a stare that could cut glass and a mind that operated like a high-precision engine. She'd spent the last 3 weeks locked in her room. The only sounds coming through the door were the frantic scratching of a pen and the rhythmic rustle of paper. She told me she was writing her own keynote. No help, no proofreading. "I've got this, Mom," she'd said. Her voice was flat, professional. It was the exact tone I used when I was triaging a chaotic medical bay. That Tuesday, I sat in my truck in the base parking lot. The engine was idling, vibrating through the floorboards. I picked up my phone. I didn't hesitate. I dialed Donna's number for the first time in over 3 years. I didn't call to beg. I didn't call to build a bridge. I called to serve a cold, hard summons of the soul. "Jefferson Middle School, Friday, 10 a.m., I said the second she picked up. I didn't give her the opening for a hello. "Lily is the valedictorian. She's giving the speech. I expect you to be in the front row." There was a long, calculated silence on the other end. I could practically hear Donna's brain shifting gears, the sound of a predator spotting a fresh, shiny trophy. The 3 years of total silence were erased the moment she smelled a chance for public glory. "Valedictorian?" Donna's voice was a honeyed purr, dripping with a fake, nauseating sweetness. Well, I always knew that girl had potential. I suppose my prayers finally reached the ears of the Lord. "Spare me the theater, Donna," I snapped. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white against the cracked leather. "Just be there, 10 sharp. Don't be late." I hung up before she could launch into her script. I knew exactly what was happening. Donna Lowe didn't see a grandchild she'd tried to discard 14 years ago. She saw a gold-plated accessory she could parade in front of her social circle. She was already mentally drafting the lies she'd feed to her book club. By Wednesday, the gossip mill in our hometown was spinning at a frantic velocity. My contact at the base, a woman whose sister lived just 3 doors down from Donna, confirmed my suspicions. Donna was braying to anyone who would listen at the local library's afternoon social. She was loud, shameless, and completely rewriting history. "We've been so deeply involved in her education," Donna had told the group, according to the report. "It's been such a long, difficult road, but the Lowe legacy of excellence always triumphs. I've already purchased my dress for the ceremony, lavender silk. It cost a small fortune, but for a milestone this significant, cost is no object." She was stealing 14 years of my sweat and sacrifice and rebranding it as a family miracle. She hadn't sent a single card. She hadn't bought a single gallon of milk. But there she was, buying a lavender dress to play the part of the doting matriarch. The hypocrisy was a physical weight in my chest. I called Stacy next. I figured if the ship was going down, I'd give the deserter one last chance to stand on deck. I can't make it, Maria, Stacy whispered. I could hear the mindless blare of a television in the background, some loud, colorful cartoon. Tommy has a soccer game. It's the regional playoffs. You know how Richard is about sports. He'd have a literal meltdown if we weren't in the bleachers. A soccer game, I repeated. The words felt like ash. Your niece is the valedictorian, Stacy. She's 13. Tommy is 8. There will be 500 more games. You don't get it, she hissed, her voice trembling with that familiar, hollow fear. Mom is already going. If I show up and stand next to you, she'll cut my childcare allowance for a month. She's still paying the insurance on my van, Maria. I can't risk it. I didn't argue. You can't fix a rotted spine with words. Good luck with the soccer, Stacy. I hope that plastic trophy is worth the price of your soul. I clicked the phone off. The sound of plastic hitting the stone counter echoed through the empty kitchen. The night before the ceremony, the house smelled like starch and hot steam. I had spent an hour ironing Lily's graduation gown. It was a deep, midnight black, the fabric stiff and formal. I hung it on the back of her bedroom door like a suit of armor. I stood in the hallway, the floorboards cold under my feet. The door was cracked open an inch. Lily was sitting at her desk, her back a straight, narrow line of focus. The only light came from a small desk lamp, casting long, jagged shadows against the wall. She was staring into her vanity mirror, her lips moving silently as she rehearsed the rhythm of her words. In the center of her open notebook, I saw it. The cream-colored envelope. The edges were frayed. The paper looked heavy and toxic against the white-lined pages. For 14 years, I had kept that venom locked in a box in my closet. I had saved it like a round of black market ammunition for a war I hoped she'd never have to fight. My heart thudded, heavy and slow. I considered walking in. I considered taking it from her. Every maternal instinct I had screamed at me to protect her, to tell her she didn't have to carry Donna's hate onto that stage. But I stopped. I looked at the way Lily held her chin. I looked at the unwavering discipline in her shoulders. She wasn't a victim. She was a soldier I had trained for this exact deployment. I had taught her how to read the terrain. I had taught her how to hold her fire until the target was perfectly centered in the crosshairs. I stepped back into the shadows of the hallway. I didn't say a word. I didn't interfere. This was the handoff. The mission was no longer mine to lead. I was just the support unit now. Lily reached out and picked up the letter. She didn't look at it with sadness. She looked at it with the cold, calculating eye of an executioner checking the edge of a blade. She stood up, grabbed the black gown, and slid the cream-colored envelope into the deep, hidden pocket of the robe. She patted the fabric once, making sure it was secure. The gun was loaded. The safety was off. I went back to my room and sat in the dark. Tomorrow, the world was going to see the mistake Donna Lowe had written off 14 years ago. And they were going to hear the truth in her own words. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. June 14th. The air inside the Jefferson Middle School gymnasium was a thick, stagnant soup of human heat and industrial floor wax. 300 people packed into the bleachers and the rows of folding metal chairs, creating a low, vibrating hum that made the skin on the back of my neck prickle. Above, the high-intensity halogen lights buzzed, casting a harsh, unforgiving glare onto the waxed wood of the basketball court. I sat in the third row. My back was a straight, unyielding line against the cold metal of the chair. To my left, Major Margaret Hayes sat in silence, her presence a solid, familiar anchor. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. This wasn't a time for chatter. It was the quiet before the breach. Donna and Richard had arrived 15 minutes early, moving through the crowd with the practiced grace of small-town royalty. Donna was a vision of expensive hypocrisy in her lavender silk dress. She wore a double strand of pearls that caught the overhead light, her face painted into a mask of doting grandmotherhood. She sat in the very center of the front row, the VIP position. She leaned over to the woman next to her, whispering and pointing toward the stage, her smile wide and artificial. She looked like she had personally funded the entire school district. I watched her from the shadows of the third row. I saw the way she patted her hair, the way she adjusted her silk skirt. She was a predator at a banquet, ready to feast on the glory she hadn't earned. Then, the principal stepped to the podium. The feedback from the speakers let out a sharp, metallic squeal that cut through the room like a whistle. And now, please welcome our class valedictorian, Lily Lowe. The applause was a sudden, crashing wave. Lily stepped out from the wings. At 14, she had the height and the poise of a woman twice her age. She wore the black graduation gown like a suit of armor. Her footsteps were rhythmic and deliberate. Thud, 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 echoing against the floorboards with a military precision that made my heart swell. She didn't wave to the crowd. She didn't scan for her friends. She walked straight to the podium, gripped the sides of the wooden stand, and pulled the microphone down. The sound of the metal stand grinding was loud in the sudden silence. Lily looked out at the crowd. Her eyes swept across the 300 faces, skipping over the teachers and the administrators. She looked at me for exactly 1 second. A ghost of a nod passed between us, the final handoff. Then, her gaze dropped. She locked onto the front row. She locked onto Donna. Lily didn't start with a joke. She didn't talk about the future or the memories of middle school. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what makes a person successful, Lily began. Her voice was low, steady, and carried a weight that made the people in the back rows lean forward. Most people would tell you it's about talent or luck, but I know better. I know it's about who stays in the room when the lights go out. The gym went graveyard quiet. Even the toddlers in the back stopped fussing. There is one person who deserves the credit for me standing on this stage, Lily continued. She wasn't looking at her notes. She was looking at the lavender dress in the front row. My mother, Maria. When she was 26 years old, she was told she could never have children. She was a combat medic. She worked 50 hours a week, and she chose to take me in when I was nothing but a nameless infant in a blue folder. I felt Margaret's hand settle on my arm, but I didn't move. I watched Donna. The proud grandmother's smile was still on her face, but it had turned brittle. Her eyes were flickering, searching Lily's face for the script she expected. My mother did it all alone. Lily's voice rose, turning sharp and cold. She paid every medical bill. She changed every diaper. She stayed up every night while I was sick. She did it alone because the people who shared her blood, the people who claimed to be good Christian family, decided that I was a mistake. They decided that my mother was a disgrace for choosing me. They turned their backs when we were at our weakest, and they stayed away for 14 years. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The murmurs started, a low, buzzing sound like a disturbed hive. Heads began to turn toward the front row. Donna's smile finally died. Her face didn't just fall, it eroded. I saw the sweat begin to bead on her upper lip, turning her expensive foundation into a muddy mess. Richard looked down at his shoes, his face the color of a bruised plum. Lily leaned into the microphone. The tension in the room was so thick it felt like it might snap the rafters. I used to wonder why I didn't have grandparents, Lily said, her voice dropping into a whisper that carried to every corner of the gym. I used to think maybe they were gone, but last year I found out the truth. I found out exactly what they thought of me. Lily reached into the deep, hidden pocket of her black graduation robe. The movement was slow, calculated. Every eye in the room followed her hand. She pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. Under the harsh halogen lights, the embossed initials, DC, glowed with a sickly, pale light. Lily held it up for the entire room to see. She held it like she was holding a piece of evidence in a murder trial. In the front row, Donna looked like she was having a stroke. The blood had completely drained from her face, leaving her the color of old parchment. She tried to stand, her chair letting out a sharp, agonizing screech against the floorboards, but her knees seemed to give out. She slumped back down, her hand clutching the pearls at her neck so hard the string looked like it might snap. Lily didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She slid a thumb under the flap of the envelope and ripped it open. The sound of the paper tearing was amplified by the speakers, a jagged, violent noise that echoed like a gunshot. This letter was written 14 years ago, Lily said, her eyes fixed on Donna's shaking form. And today, the world is finally going to hear what it says. Donna's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the exit, then back at the girl on the stage. She was trapped. 300 people were watching the mask fall off. Lily took a breath. The silence was absolute. Paragraph 1, Lily said. The Jefferson Middle School gymnasium was a vacuum. 300 people sat in the bleachers, but the air was dead. Static. The only sound was the low electric hum of the overhead halogen lights. Lily stood at the podium, her black graduation gown looking like a shadow against the polished wood floors. She didn't look like a 13-year-old girl anymore. She looked like a judge reading a verdict from a high bench. Her hands didn't shake. She held the cream-colored envelope between two fingers, and the embossed initials caught the light. D.C. Donna Lowe's brand. Lily reached into the envelope. The sound of the heavy paper sliding out was amplified by the speakers, a jagged scratching noise that made the front row flinch. The first shot, Lily began. Her voice was a cold blade. It sliced through the stagnant air. Maria, I cannot support this decision. You are throwing away your life for someone else's mistake. The gym went graveyard quiet. I sat in the third row, my back a rigid line of steel. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at Donna. In the front row, the proud grandmother mask was gone. It had been replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She gripped the metal armrests of her chair so hard her knuckles were the color of bone. The lavender silk of her dress looked like a funeral shroud under the harsh gym lights. That was the opening line, Lily continued. She didn't stop for the gasps. She didn't wait for the audience to process the cruelty. She just kept firing. That child comes from some dirty corner of the world. You have no idea what kind of trouble she will bring into our home. And you expect us to pretend this is normal? A collective hiss of air left the room. It was the sound of 300 people realizing they had been lied to for a decade. Barbara Nolan, the town's primary gossip, sat with her mouth hanging open, her eyes darting from Lily to Donna. The miracle granddaughter's story was dying a violent death. Donna's face didn't just fall, it eroded. The sweat was thick on her forehead now, making her expensive foundation look like wet clay. Beside her, Richard was a ghost. He hunched over, staring at the floorboards, trying to sink into the wood. Lily didn't flinch. She turned the page. The crinkle of the paper sounded like a gunshot. "Do not come home," Lily read. Her voice dropped into a low, echoing rumble. "Do not call this house. Do not bring her here. Until you come to your senses and realize what you have done, you are on your own. Signed, Mother." The finality of those words, signed, Mother, hit the room with the force of a wrecking ball. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever felt. 14 years of Sunday dinners and church hospitality were stripped bare. The woman in the front row wasn't a doting matriarch. She was a woman who had tried to bury her own daughter and a nameless infant because of a dirty corner. Lily stood there for a heartbeat, letting the poison settle into the room. She didn't look away from Donna. She watched her grandmother's world crumble in real time. Then Lily folded the paper. She didn't put it back in her pocket. She held it out over the podium like a piece of evidence in a capital murder trial. 14 years ago, this letter was supposed to be the end of our story, Lily said. Her voice changed then. It lost the coldness. It became something stronger. My mother, Maria, didn't keep this to hurt anyone. She kept it to remember why she worked the night shifts. She kept it to remember why she spent her food allowance on my medicine instead of a new coat. She kept it because this letter is the reason we never quit. Lily turned her head. She looked directly at me in the third row. Her eyes were bright, fierce, and full of a love that didn't need a blood test to prove its worth. "Thank you, Mom," Lily said. A small, sad smile touched her lips. "Thank you for choosing me when the people who were supposed to love you the most told you I was a mistake. Thank you for building a home out of nothing but discipline and grit. You were always enough. You were always more than enough." The silence broke. It didn't just break, it shattered. It started with Major Margaret Hayes. She stood up, her uniform crisp, and started to clap. A slow, rhythmic, powerful sound. Then the people in the fourth row stood. Then the bleachers. Within 10 seconds, the entire Jefferson Middle School gym was on its feet. It wasn't just a graduation applause. It was a roar of validation. It was 300 people acknowledging the war we had won in the shadows. Donna Lowe didn't wait for the clapping to end. She didn't wait for the principal to reclaim the stage. She grabbed her leather purse, her face a twisted mask of humiliation. She stood up, her chair screeching across the wood floor, and bolted for the exit. She didn't look at the stage. She didn't look at me. She just ran, her lavender dress disappearing through the double doors. Richard followed her, his head down, a broken man trailing a broken queen. I sat there while the world cheered for my daughter. I felt the suffocating knot in my throat finally loosen. I felt the weight of that cream-colored envelope leave my soul for good. The battlefield was empty. The enemy had fled. Lily stepped down from the podium, her black gown flowing behind her. She walked through the crowd, ignoring the hands reaching out to congratulate her. She came straight to the third row. She stopped in front of me, her eyes clear and steady. "Mission accomplished, Mom," she whispered. I stood up and pulled her into a hug. She smelled like old paper and new beginnings. I didn't cry. I just held her tight and looked at the empty front row. The fortress was secure. The truth was out. And for the first time in 14 years, the silence was finally peaceful. The sound started as a ripple. One person stood up in the middle of the bleachers, then 10. Within seconds, the movement turned into a tidal wave. 300 people in the Jefferson Middle School gymnasium stood as one, their applause hitting the rafters with the force of a thunderclap. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of a graduation ceremony. It was a roar of collective realization, a stadium-sized validation for the medic and the mistake who had fought their way out of the shadows. In the front row, the silence was different. It was a vacuum of pure, unadulterated shame. I watched the back of Donna's head. She didn't turn around. She didn't look at the crowd. I saw her shoulders hitch, her hands frantically fumbling for the leather strap of her purse. Then came the sound. A sharp, agonizing screech of metal legs against the waxed wood floor. Donna bolted. She didn't walk. She scrambled. Her expensive lavender silk dress caught the light one last time as she ducked her head, weaving through the standing crowd like a criminal fleeing a crime scene. Richard followed her, his head down, his posture slumped into the shape of a man who had finally realized he was a ghost in his own life. They didn't look back. They didn't even try to defend the ruins of their reputation. They just vanished through the double doors, leaving the echoes of their own cruelty behind them. The enemy had abandoned the field. Behind the stage, the air smelled of heavy curtains and old floor wax. I found Lily near the equipment racks. She was still wearing the black gown, but the stiffness in her shoulders had finally broken. The moment she saw me, she didn't act like a valedictorian or a soldier. She just acted like my daughter. She threw her arms around my waist and buried her face in my shoulder, her body shaking with a jagged, heavy sob. "Are you mad?" she whispered into my shirt, her voice muffled and raw. "I didn't tell you I was going to do it. I couldn't let her win anymore." I held her tight. My hands, still rough from years of heavy lifting and base work, cupped the back of her head. I leaned down and spoke directly into her ear, my voice low and steady, carrying the weight of a final command. "That letter belonged to you just as much as it did to me, Lily," I said. "She wrote about both of us. You had every right to fire back." We stood there for a long time, tucked away from the noise of the gym. I felt the tension that had lived in my gut for 14 years finally begin to dissolve, turning into nothing but cold, stagnant water. The mission was over. By the time we got home, the sun was dipping below the Rust Belt horizon, turning the sky the color of a bruised plum. I walked into the kitchen and saw the red light on my desk phone blinking. A rhythmic, insistent pulse. One new message. I hit the button. The speaker hissed with static before Donna's voice filled the room. It wasn't the honeyed church lady purr she used in public. It was a shrill, frantic screech. "How could you?" she screamed, the sound distorting the small speaker. "How could you let that child humiliate us like that? In front of the entire town. In front of the Nolans. I will never forgive you for this, Maria. Never. You've destroyed this family's name over a grudge." She didn't mention the words she'd written. She didn't apologize for calling a baby filth. She only cared about the name. She was a hollow queen reigning over a kingdom of glass, and she was furious that someone had finally thrown a stone. I didn't even let the message finish. I reached out and tapped the button. Beep! The voice vanished. Deleted. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel a need to call her back and scream. I just felt a deep, profound boredom. The woman was a relic, and I was finished being her museum curator. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Stacy. I heard what happened. "I'm so sorry it came to this. I wish things were different, but Richard says we should probably keep our distance for a while to let things settle. Give Lily my love." I looked at the screen for a second. Keep our distance. The deserter was still hiding in the foxhole, waiting for someone else to tell her when it was safe to come out. I didn't reply. I blocked the number. The tumor was finally out, and I wasn't going to let it grow back. The next morning, the world was quiet. I woke up at 5 a.m. Habit is a hard thing to kill. I didn't go to the base. I didn't check my emails. I just walked out onto the front porch of the house I'd bought with my own blood and sweat. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and cut grass. I sat in the old wooden chair and cradled a mug of black coffee. The heat seeped into my palms, steady and real. I looked out at the street. The neighborhood was still asleep. I thought about the word family. For a long time, I thought it was a trap, a set of chains made of DNA and expectations. But as I watched the gray light of dawn crawl over the shingles of my roof, I realized I'd been wrong. Family isn't the people who share your blood. It's not the people who show up for the photos and the Sunday ham. Family is the people who stay in the room when the oxygen gets thin. It's the person who picks up the wrench and helps you build a crib in the dark. It's the girl who finds a toxic letter and uses it as fuel to become the smartest person in the room. I took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and hot. I liked it that way. Inside the house, I heard the floorboards creak. Lily was up. I heard the clinking of a cereal bowl and the low hum of the radio. I leaned my head back against the siding of my house. I didn't need Donna's forgiveness. I didn't need Stacy's hollow apologies. I had built an empire out of grit and a $62,000 foreclosure. I had raised a lioness. The war was over. I had held the line. And for the first time in my entire life, the silence wasn't a threat. It was a reward. I closed my eyes and let the morning sun hit my face. I was Maria Lowe. I was a mother. And I was finally home.